Good evening, Central Valley. This is Kevin Little, and welcome to this week's episode of Valley Movers and Shakers. We've got an exciting lineup of guests for this week's episode. We have Patricia Ramos-Anderson from the League of United Latin American Citizens in Merced County, and also a candidate for supervisor in that county. We also have Junus, a former Fresno police officer and the principal of the Premium Commercial Group here, and we also have Ashley Werner, who is a senior attorney from the Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability. So we've got three very different guests who are all moving and shaking in their own ways, and we'll get started just when we come back from these messages. Just for those of you who have yet to tune into this show, let me tell you a little bit about what our message is, or what our intended message is on this show. We try to bring you good news. We operate on the premise that you receive enough bad news from many other sources, and we try to bring in guests who will inspire you, who will motivate you, who will show you that people are working every day to build a stronger community here in the Valley, to increase the quality of life for its citizens, and to move and shake, quite simply. So we'll get started when we come back. Stay tuned for these messages. Welcome back to Valley Movers and Shakers. Once again, I'm Kevin Little, and I have my first guest, who I'm honored to have come on the show, Patricia Ramos-Anderson. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for the invite. I'm enthusiastically happy to be here.
Well, you have done so many exciting things in Merced and are continuing to do those. But I think you have a very interesting story about how you ended up in Merced County and how you became involved in the community. Maybe you can tell us the short version of that.
Short version was basically my grandparents came here during the Depression. And then they had roots here for 5 years. They still continue to have land in the area as we speak. They went back to Philadelphia and also to Mexico, where they had a large ranch. And so the memories of my childhood memories out here is where I decided, me and my husband wanted to return back to a small town,
Right.
and come back to some of those family memories that we had. And that's how we ended up retiring in Santanella. We thought Los Baños was too big. We said, it's gotten too big. My husband laughed at me. He said, we just came from a city of 1 million almost in San Jose.
Right.
I said, but we liked Santanella because you had the water, small town feel, and we as residents would be able to develop our town the way we wanted it to be developed.
Well, let me stop you, because you said you came here to retire.
Yes.
Well, you've done anything but retire. Just the list of projects and organizations in which you are involved is extremely lengthy and would exhaust a person who maybe has a lot fewer years than you. So why don't you give our audience a sense of the different projects in which you're involved?
Well, basically, I'm currently the president of LULAC. It's the League of United Latin American Citizens. It's one of the oldest civil rights organizations, and it is the largest one of volunteers. And our motto is all for one and one for all. We do partnerships, collaborations. It's representing everyone in the community. And voting rights, and reference to also economic development, health, education, housing, and so on and so forth. And when we retired out here, we first discovered some issues and challenges with water.
Okay.
And we didn't realize the challenges of how water systems were being run or were not being run very correctly or abiding by the law of Prop 218. Then also you had the other issue of the Prop 13 of how our state taxpayer money should be spent, and for folks to have a right to say how it's going to be done, but we also have a vote. And that's what got us involved and actively involved in the area, was because of those violations. People were not following the law.
So
and
originally it was the politics
It was
related to water use and
Water
oftentimes abuse.
and abuse.
Right.
And so that's when we started to, work together, identify the community, and see what their issues and needs were, as well as also in the region.
And you actually have been on the water board.
Yeah, I was the first elected Latina since 1965 to the Santanella Water District that was elected. And I had 5 main goals of transparency. They wanted to make sure that everybody had a voice, there was respect, and also accountability. And I was able to attain those 4 major goals in my 4-year term. And I was a lone voter for a while there, up until a year or 2 years ago. A year ago, we got a second person on board, on the water board.
No small feat to build a coalition on a water board. Many of the water board members are involved in agriculture, and some would say have a vested interest in perhaps not working in the public interest. How were you able to build a coalition?
Well, basically the coalition was with residents, meeting with them one-on-one, meeting with the business community, but more importantly also meeting with the education was very important for us as well, and meeting with the parents and the different school districts in the area and identifying our priorities. And what we discovered in unincorporated communities, they're called the disadvantaged, a lot of the revenues that they generated wasn't being returned back or being invested into these communities. Example, Santanel in 2010 brings in $3.5 million of TOT, transit occupancy tax. They're mandated by give a certain percentage, a small percentage, that goes directly to the water district. It could be between $67,000 to $74,000, depending on what you make that year.
Right.
The rest of the money was going back to the county. We were subsidizing cities, county services for the rest of the county, and that money was not being reinvested into our local neighborhoods. So how does a town that's been bringing in that average of resources, revenues, not have a community park?
And a town that,
A town
as you say, is
that's
lacking
booming.
in public services.
Public services,
Right,
where
and-
you have new development. You don't even have a crosswalk that allows you to access from the residential area across to the commercial districts. You don't even have a sidewalk that runs from the one end of the development to over Highway 5 to the other side of where the business community was. So we also worked very closely with Measure V. That was one of the key things that some of the cities locally did not support Measure V. I said, oh no, we're not going to let them dictate what we see is a very important action that we need to take in developing our infrastructure and transportation.
So through those means, you've been able to increase
Yes.
the local capture percentage of those TOT funds.
Yes, the TOT funds, and now with Measure V, the measure being passed, I sit on the MCAG as the Economic Development Representative, and then I also sit on other for the Voter Register's Office on one of the Language Accessibility Committee, and I sit on other committees because of my background in government for 32 years working for the City of San Jose, but also working with unincorporated communities in Santa Clara County in San Jose. We had small little pockets of agricultural areas. We have one of the largest working agricultural park in San Jose, which is Emma Prush Park. Who would have thought, in the middle of Silicon Valley?
Now, Patricia, you make it sound like it was easy to elbow your way to the table and become a player and to accomplish the things that you've done both in LULAC and also in the water board. And it wasn't easy. You had to overcome some challenges, I'm sure. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
You look at challenges as opportunities.
That's right.
And I've always looked at them in that fashion, that we're here to work together and have a common goal. You could be from one extreme to the spectrum to the other, but the middle ground is where we kind of meet and we look forward on what's the benefit for the community as a whole. Also, what's the future for the community of the whole and also of the township, the infrastructure. And we have to look at long-term goals. Apply for all resources that are available to us because of my experience in government with the redevelopment agency, neighborhood business districts, neighborhood revitalization strategies. We were the model for the Weed and Seed nationwide in 1991, the Mayor's Gang Task Force.
So you brought a skill set that not very many people had in your new community.
Exactly. And what we did from there was we shared some of that information to the county. They chose to, oh, it looks nice and everything, but once in our new development we found out we had a gang house, drug house, or they were doing activity that we were accustomed to, I was supervising or addressing with my sworn officers. I supervised officers for 14 years. We then said, okay, if you're not going to take it on county, we the community will, and we'll use these skills that I've learned, teach our residents, and they also learned how to close down and abate public nuisance properties. And that was, how could a new development, a new community have 2 public nuisance properties? I said, well, this is how we do it. We showed the residents, they learned. Even one of our CHP officers in his back-end development had a public nuisance property, and he knew what to do because we had done it.
So, don't want you to feel like you're bragging, but what are some of the accomplishments that you're most proud of that you've been able to obtain since you've been a member of the Water District Board in Santa Ana and also in LULAC in Merced County?
In the water district, for me, it was making sure all the homes were metered, especially the mobile home park community. And when folks didn't quite understand that you don't wait till you're required to by the year of 2025, that grant money doesn't stay there. And sometimes, even though it came from a woman or someone that was a young woman, until they heard it from the consultant that was a male, etc., they told she's actually right. You guys have to apply for the money now and not wait, because they'd have to foot the whole bill for that mandate. And that was one of the things. Then also working as LULAC, there we were able to work and address issues of hiring practices in the local area with the school district, leaseback issues, and also
it's been a big issue in a lot of Central Valley communities, and Merced, no exception.
And the biggest one was that the residents of the West Side wanted change. They wanted change, and they decided to vote and establish district elections. That was the most important and the biggest outcome that happened, that the community themselves came together. We provided the resources, the information. They voted it in other areas. The elected officials actually chose to make the right decision because they knew it was the right decision to make and establish district elections. Others chose not to and put it on a ballot. Right. And the outcome was 65% voted for district elections.
So obviously that helps increase the accountability.
It changes the accountability. Also, it reflects the community, and they also had more choices now of who the community, the residents, the citizen was going to elect to represent them now in their own little pie, in their community. Because at-large elections had been running since the establishment of some communities since over 125 years. Los Banos was established. So elections weren't district, they were at-large. So it didn't give everyone an equal opportunity or affordability to run in a citywide campaign just for a school board or city council.
But you haven't stopped with the water district. You haven't stopped with all of the great activities that you've done as a member of LULAC in Merced County. You've also asserted yourself in countywide politics as well.
Yes, and that was one of the key things, is that we realized even though you wanted to work with your elected officials, sometimes they were not responsive, but they didn't address the needs. And that's the difference between myself. When I was working in public service, I always said I was a public servant. And the difference between a public servant and a bureaucrat and a politician is that the public servant will do whatever they can to assist you or get what it is that you need to address. A bureaucrat, if you only ask them that specific question, they're only going to answer that. They won't give you any more information.
Right.
A politician will talk about addressing and working with you, but there's really no end result. And that was our biggest end result. The biggest issue in Santanel at that time was a park or a community center. There was no recreational facilities. The schools were all gated up like little mini, almost like little jails almost. They were fenced in with wrought iron.
No place for a young person to receive an education.
For a young person, and studies show, with my background in Weed and Seed, if you don't have activities for the kids, they will get into the negative element. You have gangs, drugs, and crime. So it's best to invest in prevention than to invest in incarcerating one youth at $60,000 a year. That would have paid for all your summer recreation program free in a small town like Santanel of only 1,308 people. So we got to use common sense, be smart, and we can work together. We might not agree, because one of the biggest challenges that we discovered was we were considered as them and those. And that was the first time I've ever been referred to as a them and those person. Right. And then I found out later we were referred to as transplants. Well, people don't understand the history of California.
Right. The state of transplants, so to speak.
Yeah, they've been here a long time. Then you had the Europeans that came on 3 boats, and then the United States was established with the 13 colonies, and then it grew. But remember, these were other countries too, with a population already. So what we have is we like to embrace our diversity because we come from communities that we embrace the diversity, the culture, the foods, the celebrations, and that's what we want to extend here in our new communities that we moved into. That it's not us and we or them or those people, is that we are one. We're part of the human race, and we want to celebrate everything that we bring to the table. And when we eat at a table, I like to have a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of this.
Hopefully some people in Washington, Sacramento are listening.
Yeah, sometimes just a little step can go very far.
So what are your goals moving forward? What are you eager and hoping that you can accomplish?
For me, is looking that we start to create change and that the revenues that are being generated by communities get invested in them. That's the number one priority right now. We have too many unincorporated communities that have not been allowed through a certain process to become incorporated. We could also do it in another method of putting as a ballot measure. We also are looking at, we want to make sure that we continue to embrace our differences as our diversity from age to different backgrounds to your history, that we are one community and not allow the national politics to create that divisiveness. We are one, we are united, and we will take care and watch out for each other's children, or we will look out for each other as a neighbor and continue with that same mindset. And I think the third point that's really important is holding our government accountable and elected officials. That's going to be very key because we're going through changes. We're establishing now, developing more of a voter education process with LULAC. That's very key for us. Voter representation, diversity, and also abiding by the laws. Everything that we've done was because of a law. Hiring practices in a school board that was not allowing everybody an equal opportunity was an issue.
Right.
And now we have a new
But
superintendent.
someone had to force the issue.
We had to bring it to their table, try to work with them, and then eventually use our legal resources available to us. And we follow the law.
Well, Patricia, before my guests depart, I'd like to give them a chance to address the audience directly. And your experience and your background, I think you can answer this question. You might have some people out there who are dissatisfied with the way things are in their communities, but think for whatever reason that it's not really possible for them to assert themselves other than perhaps by voting in every election. What do you have to say for people who have that mentality?
Well, it's just to let you know, you have two options. You could either be part of the solution, or you'll continue to live in that desperation that is not welcoming to how you're feeling right now. Your vote matters. Your vote is your power. It shows your presence, and it's going to make a difference. Remember, John F. Kennedy, when he ran for president, he was an Irish Catholic individual from Irish background. He won by one vote from each precinct in the United States. Remember that. Every vote matters, but if you don't vote, then you have no stance to complain. You chose not to create a change with your vote. It matters, and it creates change.
And then you're a great example of someone who doesn't just rely on the power of the vote, but the power of the voice and the power of participation.
Yes, very
And
key.
I thank you for that.
Well, thank you so very much for inviting me, and it was great meeting you.
It's great meeting you.
Thank you
Hope
again.
to see you again sometime.
Most definitely.
Patricia Ramos-Anderson, we'll be right back. Awesome.
Thank you.
Welcome back to Valley Movers and Shakers, and I'm very happy to introduce our second guest on today's episode, Junus Perry from Premier Commercial Group. Junus, thank you for joining us.
Hey, thank you for having me, Kevin. My pleasure. Thank you.
Now,
Happy to be here.
Junus, I know that you have been a member, a contributing member of the Valley community for some time, first
Yes.
in law enforcement and
Yes.
now in real estate.
Yes.
Why don't you tell us how you began your journey as a servant of this community?
Growing up in the community, as a child, I would spend my summers in Northern California. And in Northern California, I would see a large number of African-American police officers in San Francisco or in Oakland. So as I grew up here, I didn't see as many. So I believe that, and I was raised by my mother to believe that, if you want to affect change, then you get out and do it. And you take part in it. So as a result of that, I ended up going into law enforcement.
Okay.
And then, I worked in law. Prior to that, I worked in real estate as well. And then I went into law enforcement.
And you served on the
Yes,
with the
I-
Fresno Police Department for many, many years.
Yes, I started out with the Kings County Sheriff's Department, worked there and then transferred to the Fresno Police Department, served the citizens of Fresno as a police officer, and now I own my own commercial real estate business.
So when you transitioned out of law enforcement back into real estate, because as you said, you had done real estate prior to your law enforcement career, you know, you came into it, some people might say not at exactly the right time, right?
This is true.
There were some difficulties in the real estate market, but you saw that as an opportunity.
It is. Every obstacle is an opportunity to find success, to excel. And I saw it as this is an opportunity for me to gain experience, knowledge, wisdom in various fields in the commercial arena so that as the industry improved, I would be in a position to capitalize and do well.
So maybe you can give our viewers an idea of how you went from Junus Perry, new to re-entering the real estate professional community here in the Valley to where you are today, owning, you know, your own very, very successful company.
Well, I went back. I had been selling real estate the entire time I was an officer, as something, as an extra, as something to do to break up the monotony of dealing with that 3 to 5% of our society that is constantly getting in trouble.
Right.
So I went into that, and so when I ended up leaving law enforcement because I medically retired, I decided to go into it full time. And in going into it full time, I began dealing with the residential market, and then by the grace of God, I was contacted by various friends that were business owners that understood some of the things that I had gone through that caused me to leave law enforcement, and they reached out to me and assisted me in getting involved in commercial real estate. They owned businesses, they owned land, and that's how I was able to get involved in commercial real estate.
Now, the interesting thing about your business plan is you don't see this merely as a bottom line oriented endeavor. You see this as a way to give back to and to serve your community.
Absolutely.
Can you explain that a little bit?
The thing that I believe is that there are a lot of people in our society, in our community, that have the ability to open certain businesses, but they haven't been exposed to understanding that. For example, if someone wants to open, say, a taqueria,
Right.
that you can buy a
I hope somebody opens that.
yeah. You can buy a gas station. You can buy a gas station,
Right.
and then put a taqueria in it.
Right.
You don't just have to have a taqueria.
So you help your clients not only find properties, but
Right.
you help them
Understand-
imagine opportunities.
Absolutely, because there are individuals that have been career employees that have earned and saved a considerable amount of money that have the ability to open a business. So when I'm contacted by them, then I sit down with them and go into great detail and send them off to the to Small Business Association and get them directed on the path of ownership.
And I know that diversifying the power structure here in the Valley is something that you feel strongly about.
Absolutely.
And you've provided opportunities
Absolutely.
to many women, persons of color who have sought to become players in the real estate field.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
I believe that in order to affect change in our community, it all starts with one person, and that starts within your home. So if you have an innate desire to do a certain thing, you have to follow that goal and follow that dream. But more importantly, once you're doing that and learning, it's important that you find someone else behind you to teach them as you're learning,
Right.
to expose them to that so that they can grow and feed their families as well. So it's in essence, if everyone followed that model, we wouldn't have a need for police officers, in theory. If everyone followed that model, we wouldn't have a need for welfare, in theory.
Right.
So my philosophy is, if I can dream it by the grace of God, I'm gonna try it. And I'm gonna push the envelope and do my best with it. And I'm going to assist anyone who comes to me and says, I'd like to learn that thing. I'll do what I can to help them.
So what are some of the projects that you've worked on that you're most proud of?
Oh, wow. I have a bunch that I've worked on that I'm most proud of. And in all honesty, the project that I am most proud of has nothing to do with my career as a broker, but has to do with my career as a deputy sheriff. In Kings County, I would drive my patrol car, because remember I said I was always involved in real estate.
Right.
And the kids would play in the street, and they'd play football in the street. So I'd get out of my patrol car and I'd play catch with the kids in the street. So one day, my deputy sheriff, my sergeant, some other deputies were all together having morning coffee, and I sat there and I had a napkin and I said, I'm going to figure out a way to build a community center in Kings County, in Home Gardens, to help these kids. I'm going to do this. I'm going to figure this out. And they laughed at me. I'll never forget it. They kind of chuckled and said,
For those that don't know, Home Garden is the predominantly African American.
yes. And that was the area, right? And that's the area I was assigned to patrol.
Right.
So I said, I'm going to figure out a way to make this happen. I have the relationships and connections. I'm going to do this. So I sat down and I started contacting contractors I knew in Fresno and saying, hey, I would like to build a community center. By the grace of God, someone contacted the sheriff's department within 2 weeks and said, hey, we're going to donate land. Can you do anything with it? So my sergeant puts me in touch with that family. I contact my buddy who owns his own construction company, Davis Construction. Davis Construction gets involved. He contacts his architect. The architect creates a rendering of it. And then from there, I went to the Kings County Community Action Group.
Right.
And there is a community center there now, which all started with me sitting at a table with my sergeant and another deputy. And thank you for turning on the fan, by the way.
and even though the land was donated, because I know a little bit about the history of this as well, it still wasn't easy. You still had some skeptics. You still had some obstacles.
When I initially created this and started going to the Kings Community Action Group and saying, would you consider this? And we didn't have a financial mechanism to run it. So I went to them and said, if I could make this happen, would you run it? And they basically looked at me and chuckled. They thought, here's this guy in this deputy sheriff's uniform with a smoky hat who has now come in here with these grandiose dreams, and he wants to do this. So I believe I was placated, to be honest with you.
Right.
But I didn't give up. I just kept pushing it and pushing it and pushing it and pushing it. And it ended up coming together.
And it does, and there's a great community center now in Home Garden.
And that is probably the thing that I am the most proud of, because when you take a position like a police officer, or you become a realtor, or you become a broker, or you become a school teacher, or you're involved in banking where you're dealing with the public, or you go into construction because you're building shopping centers or you're building homes, you're doing all that because you have a desire to improve your community. You have a desire to give the people of the community that you're doing business in what they need to have a healthy and strong community. And so for me, that project is probably the most important and significant project I have ever worked on.
And now it's self-sustaining.
Yes, it is. It's still there. It's still there. And I remember meeting with the Community Action Group and said, you can teach parenting classes out of it. You can do this. And during the evening, it can be a hall for kids to come and play, and it's a safe place for them, so on and so forth. And that's where it came from. And that is what I believe that problem-oriented policing is supposed to be about. It's about people solving traditional issues in our society using unorthodox methods. However, there is a caveat to that, and I've seen it now since I'm in the commercial real estate realm. The cities, the municipalities, at times make it very difficult for those business owners to traverse that terrain to achieve some of those goals at times.
Right, and that's where hard-headed people like you need to be.
And that's why I've been down to City Hall a bunch of times. I made the former mayor. We've had some go-rounds over a project I had in downtown Fresno. The Business Journal wrote an article over it, and I wasn't going to give up. I walked the Fulton Mall and had 250 signatures signed from people who actually live down there, because there was a project that we wanted to put in that area, and we were told we couldn't do it. And I said, well, has anyone talked to the people who live down there? I'll go do it.
Right. So what do you say, Junus, to someone who is thinking, maybe I have a good business idea, but I'm the wrong color, wrong gender, I don't have any old money behind me, I can't get this done. What do you say to them?
What I would say is contact the Small Business Administration, and they will have classes that they will put on. I have met with them and offered my services to come in and speak. and give them some understanding as to what they're going to encounter when they are looking for leases, what type of leases are out there, how long of a lease they would need. The SBA will also assist them with putting together a business plan. So they will assist you with putting together a business plan, and if what it is you're doing has a need for a limited liability corporation, they will actually walk you through the LLC process as well to form that. So that's what I would tell them, and I would tell them, don't allow the social concepts of your existence, your ethnicity, to prevent you, or your gender to prevent you from achieving. God gave you this desire to do something. And if you don't do anything with it, that's wasted talent. You've got to do something with it.
So what are some of the things that you're looking at in the future that you're excited about?
One of the things that I plan on doing in the future is I would like to open a lending institution for commercial lending in time. I would love to do that. But right now, it's just a matter of continuing to do what I'm doing, continuing to make great relationships with people, and continuing to service the individuals that, by the grace of God, I have the opportunity to do business with, and continuing to strengthen my resume as far as the type of transactions that I'm involved in. So that's pretty much what's on my agenda. For me, this isn't a sprint. This is a marathon. I will be a real estate broker, God willing, when I'm 95. I'll come in here with a little cane, and hopefully you're like 120, because I think I'm a lot younger.
I'll let you get away with it. I often tell people I'm going to be the lawyer dragging the oxygen tank.
Exactly. Right. So I'm going to come in here with a little cane. I'm going to sit down and say, this is a project I'm working on,
right.
Blah, 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 blah. So for me, this is where I feel I'm really supposed to be. And when I look back at my career in law enforcement, especially that community center, I really feel this is where I'm supposed to be. And law enforcement was a wonderful vessel to raise my family, to pay my bills, and this is where I'm supposed to be. So fantastic. I can't say anything more about it.
Well, keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you.
And keep making us proud.
Hey, and thank you for finally turning on the fan. And thanks for having me, Kevin. I appreciate it, buddy. I really do.
Junus Perry. We'll be right back.
Thank you.
Welcome back to Valley Movers and Shakers, and I'm very happy to introduce our last guest for today's episode. Last but certainly not least, Ashley Werner, the Senior Counsel for the Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability here in Fresno. Ashley, thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much, Kevin.
Well, it's very exciting to have an organization doing the type of work that your organization is doing here in town. But first, before we get into that, let me just tell you how you came to the Valley and what brought you here, and then we'll talk a little bit about the Leadership Council.
Sure. So I was born in San Anselmo, California, which is a little town in the coastal area. I went to undergraduate in Pennsylvania at Swarthmore College, where I studied religion and economics, and kind of my interest in both of those fields was, how do both of those fields apply to the public good? How can you use economics as a tool for the social good? And I also had an interest in, how religion is a motivating factor in people's lives for the good. And so out of college, I ended up going to law school at Boston College Law School, and there I really focused on international law, human rights, and the nexus between law and economic development, and fundamental access to opportunity and environmental quality. And I ended up spending about a year in Peru, where I worked with a couple nonprofit organizations focused on access to rule of law, due process, and some work on ensuring that rural women in particular had knowledge of their human rights, and helping them facilitate networks to secure their rights. So I did want to come home to California, but I wanted to find a way to keep doing this work of using law to increase people's access to opportunity, especially in the areas of the environment and economic development. And I didn't know much about Fresno at all. I had only been here actually once before. Right. And a job opening came up at California Rural Legal Assistance in a program that they have that is focused on disadvantaged unincorporated communities in the region, and really addressing their core infrastructure and service needs. And so I started to find out that Fresno and the Central Valley as a whole really have a lot of the same problems that I saw in Peru, of communities that don't have clean drinking water, don't have sewer systems, sidewalks, streetlights, and really have a total absence of elected representatives that really understand their issues and are advocating for them. So I ended up taking the job. It was exactly what I wanted to do. And I kind of unexpectedly found a home in Fresno that there's great work to do. There is a never-ending amount of work to do. And there's a lot of really great people doing it and ready to be involved in it. Right. And so eventually I transitioned over to Leadership Council when it was formed in 2013.
And so you've been here working, fighting for the underserved communities in the Valley now for about 5 years.
It's been about 6 years.
6 years. Well, that's fantastic. Well, for those who maybe don't know much about the mission of the Leadership Council and how it came into being, can you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, so Leadership Council was formed in 2013 by our co-directors, Veronica Garibay and Phoebe Seaton, and the mission of it is to advocate for sound policy and eradicate injustice to secure access to opportunity regardless of wealth, race, income, or place. So that's a mouthful, but essentially we really wanted to create an organization that was rooted in the Central Valley, also have an office in the Eastern Coachella Valley, also an agricultural region, to try to transform the conditions that are barring people from accessing opportunity, and specifically focusing on low-income communities and communities of color that have historically been disadvantaged and have not had access to services. And so a big reason that we were created is that we didn't see a lot of organizations doing what it is that we do now, which is really connecting, using long-term community organizing, really rooted in a commitment to the community, that is long-lasting, and that is really ensuring that residents are equipped to become their own advocates, that we're not advocates who are going to come in and leave, and then connecting that to local, regional, and state policy change, and then also using law and litigation.
And that's one of the things I wanted to emphasize, or at least ask you to emphasize. The Leadership Council is not just focused on the legal side of things. There are lots of talented people from many different disciplines who work within the Leadership Council. Isn't that right?
Exactly, and that's one of the reasons I love working there. Is I never really wanted to be an attorney that only worked with attorneys, and I think there's probably a few people who only want to spend all their time with attorneys, and so
hands, no.
yeah, not me. And so what I love about what we do is that within our team we have a whole series of expertise and different backgrounds, different backgrounds in education and prior work experience, and so that really feeds into our ability to do not just legal advocacy and litigation, but also really strong policy work on a whole variety of issues that impact the communities that we work in.
Well, and in the Central Valley here, the Leadership Council, through its legal efforts, has already won some stirring victories.
Yes.
Can you tell us about some of those?
Yeah, so and a little background about our legal work. Typically when we decide to do legal advocacy or take on litigation, we use our resources to do litigation that's going to have a community-wide impact. We only have 4 attorneys on our team, and our goal is to really maximize the impact of our efforts and impact issues that are really a key priority for the community. And then we also tie them in as much as we can with the other efforts that we have in terms of organizing and local to state policy. And I think one of the cases that I think made a really huge impact, not only for the community in particular, but statewide, was one that we had in Matheny Tract in Tulare, California. And that one, Matheny Tract is a small, not so small, 1,200 people, but a disadvantaged, unincorporated community, a historic farm worker community, which was created during the migration of African Americans out of the South, when many of them were not allowed to live in cities because of deed restrictions.
So in some respects, not unlike some of the areas that our prior guest today talked about, underserved, unincorporated communities.
Exactly. I think our prior guest was grappling with a lot of the same issues that Leadership Council grapples with. And so Matheny Tract, like hundreds of communities across the Central Valley, has been reliant on private wells, not connected to a city municipal water system, and their wells were contaminated with arsenic. And so essentially in that case, there had been a solution agreed upon between the neighboring city of Tulare, which actually was adjacent to the community, for an investment of over $6 million in state funds to develop a new water system to connect to the community. And unfortunately, there was a change in city leadership, and after installation of $6 million worth of pipelines, they said, we're not gonna go through with this. We're not gonna comply with the commitment that we've agreed to.
They pulled the plug on the project.
They pulled the plug. The pipes were sitting dry, and the community was at risk of not ever getting their access to clean drinking water. And so the way that we moved forward alongside the community on that was twofold. Well, interestingly, the city sued our clients, and they sued the Water Mutual for declaratory relief to try to get out of the contract as it stood. Our clients, in response, countersued to uphold their rights under the contract as, I don't want to get into too much legal jargon, but third-party beneficiaries. So there's their interests under this contract to have access to clean water. And then at the same time, worked really proactively to make trips up to Sacramento, leaving their homes often at 5, 6 in the morning to do advocacy to get state policy change, where in a parallel process, they got SB 88 implemented, which gave the state authority to mandate connection to the community by the city. And so those two efforts in parallel, alongside a lot of really helpful press and reporting on the issue, including national reporting by Politico, shined a spotlight on it and resulted in a settlement that got the community clean drinking water. And there is a picture up there right now from one of our mediation sessions with our client group, and that's a number of the residents who have been involved for years in leading this effort, and I think really putting themselves on the line to be litigants, to sit through depositions and represent their community and their belief in their community's rights.
And it seems, at least from what I know about some of the efforts that the Leadership Council has taken on, is that you've really fomented activism within some of the communities that where you've gone and addressed their needs, and now you've left behind a core group of activists who are continuing fighting in other respects.
Yeah, our goal is to never just jet in and jet out, and never to go into a community that we don't really know and tell them what their interests are, to establish a relationship and a partnership, and ensure that what we're doing is providing our information, our expertise, but having them drive the strategy so that ultimately, like, it's their community, they're the experts, they're going to be there for the long term. And so the goal is to really build up this legacy of strong resident leaders who can impact change, and knowing that this is a valley-wide effort, combined with a statewide effort of other environmental justice groups across the state, that is going to be impacting change in their cities, in their counties, and also at the state level. Right. Yeah.
So, and I understand that the Leadership Council also had a similar case in Fresno where the city turned around and sued the community that you were helping to represent.
Well, yes, we had a case in Fresno, a housing element case. Yes, right. A housing element case where the city didn't actually sue the group, but they did in the end try to seek attorney's fees from the group, which our clients qualified as indigent, and they were denied that motion. Not only because our clients were indigent, but also because we didn't lose, which is a prerequisite. But yes, so that case, a part of one of the bucket areas of the work that we specialize in is housing and access to safe and affordable housing, and also housing choice of being able to have access to opportunities to choose where you live in the neighborhoods that you live in, and so we in the city of Fresno, as well as throughout the Central Valley, often we have elected officials who say we don't have a housing crisis here, that doesn't apply to us, we have cheap housing prices, and what we hear from residents is actually like our income levels don't permit us to rent at the levels, at the prices that we have here, and in fact the data bears out that the vast majority of lower income people, and actually more than the majority of all people in the Central Valley and in Fresno, are paying more than what is affordable for housing. And so this case centered around the city's legal obligations under state law to plan for affordable housing, and to take proactive steps to facilitate affordable housing and address the needs of vulnerable populations. And we found that the city, for a very prolonged period of time, had not been complying with requirements to do kind of the most fundamental requirements to actually make land available with zoning for multifamily housing. And so we had a lawsuit about that, which also involved issues relating to just basic public process. During the public hearing on the housing element for the city of Fresno, our clients were primarily monolingual Spanish speakers.
Right.
They were not allowed to have additional time for speaking, to permit additional time for translation.
Right. So they were given the same time as English speakers, which
right. And they
is
were
totally unfair.
Yeah, they were required to use a city translator who ended up using Google Translate because he didn't have training. And so, it resulted in essentially a denial of their ability to effectively communicate with their elected representatives. And elected representatives not really being responsive to their concerns. And so as a result of the litigation, there were some programs and policies that came out of it that now we're on the end where we are having to follow up and seek implementation of them. But they're programs that would try to start looking at issues of displacement in Fresno, start looking at data on it by creating an anti-displacement task force, assessing the needs of residents in mobile home parks, and also taking actions to disperse where we create affordable housing in this city, because we know there are not opportunities in vast portions of our city.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Right. So, like I do with all of my guests, I want to give you an opportunity to address our audience. Let's say that there are some attorneys who are aspiring attorneys, as the case may be, who want to serve their community, who want to accomplish some of the things that you and the Leadership Council are accomplishing, but they just are afraid. They're afraid to take that jump and are afraid to commit themselves. What do you say to motivate people to follow the path that you're following?
Well, don't be afraid. You don't get anything by being afraid. And I think following my heart has always gotten me to a place that's a good place. I've never regretted it. And following fear hasn't. And so I encourage, I think as attorneys, we're really trained to follow very narrow paths. And those paths are not dictated by what makes us happy or fulfilled or is good for the world. And I think if we make choices based on those factors, it will lead to much better outcomes. So I encourage, attorneys to do soul searching about that, and, think about whether they can dedicate a little bit of extra time to these causes, whether it's by providing pro bono legal support, getting involved as co-counsel. You can get attorneys' fees in certain cases, or, even just getting involved in the policy advocacy side, because attorneys having that knowledge in policy areas can be really helpful as well. And you can look at our organization's website, reach out to us. We need the more people, the better involved in these causes.
So how does a community, because I'm assuming that sometimes the Leadership Council identifies a problem area, but sometimes it's the other way around. Sometimes an underserved community comes to you seeking assistance. If there is an underserved community or a segment of one that thinks they need your help, how would they go about asking for it?
They can, call our number, email us. We're engaged in a lot of different public processes. There's constantly community meetings going on, and so they can always get engaged, assess if it's something that feels right to them or not. Almost all of our staff are bilingual in Spanish and English too, so we can communicate in those languages. But I just encourage folks to reach out. We're a really friendly group of people, and we're also working all the time. So you'll probably be able to get a fairly quick response because our staff really care about these issues. Yeah.
Well, Ashley, I have to say that I'm extremely impressed by the work that you and your organization do, and just keep it up.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you.
Ashley Werner. Thank you. That'll do it for this episode, and we appreciate your watching, and stay tuned, and we'll see you next week.
No queremos su lástima. Vivimos en una comunidad igual que la de ustedes. Votamos, pagamos taxas. Alguien tiene que hacer este trabajo. Vivimos aquí. aquí. Tenemos derecho a vivir en un ambiente no contaminado, con agua potable y derechos a los servicios necesarios para nuestras familias. Son 30 millas para llegar al hospital, 18 millas para llegar a la farmacia o a una tienda, 50 millas de donde hacen decisiones para nuestra comunidad. Como comunidad, decidimos que si las oportunidades y recursos están lejos de nosotros, nosotros buscaremos la forma de poder traerlos a nuestra comunidad. Nuestros votos y taxas que pagamos no han sido suficientes para estos servicios. Nos estamos organizando para asegurarnos de que nuestras voces son escuchadas. Estamos viendo victorias en este proceso. Tenemos agua embotellada. Vamos a recibir una van que va a transportar la gente a los servicios y subsidios para pagar el agua que debíamos anteriormente. Sabemos que somos más fuertes cuando estamos unidos. Estamos trayendo cambios positivos y oportunidades a nuestra comunidad. Estamos aquí y vamos a continuar luchando porque no nos vamos a ir.
CentralValleyTalk.com